You should know your place and walk away. I needed someone who looks good in photos, not someone who asks too many questions. He said it without even glancing at her. Still reclining on the leather chair, eyes closed, hand resting casually on the stack of confidential files he thought were hidden. Everything was planned. The room was locked. Yes, some recording devices were running. He was just waiting for her to make one wrong move so he could end the sweet fiancé act with a silence agreement and a forgettable payout. But she didn't touch anything. She just stood there, pulled out her phone, typed in a string of codes, and whispered to the empty air. Then congratulations. You're about to look great on the front page tomorrow morning. What he didn't know was the evidence he believed was buried deep had already left the building and gone exactly where it would bring his empire to its knees. Cyrene Halden stood in the dim light of Caleb Varel's office, her plain white blouse tucked neatly into a pair of faded jeans. No jewelry, no makeup, just her dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. The room smelled of leather and expensive cologne, but she didn't belong to this world of polished surfaces. She'd grown up in a house where every move was watched, every word weighed her parents drilling into her. That power didn't need a spotlight, it needed control. But here in this billionaire's den, she looked like an intern who'd wandered into the wrong meeting. Thorne Vallis, Caleb's lawyer, leaned against the desk, his tailored suit screaming money, his eyes narrowing as he watched her every step. He whispered to Caleb loud enough for her to hear, "She's too quiet. Nobody's that clean. I'd bet she's got an angle." Cyrene didn't flinch. She just set an old photo of Caleb smiling, younger, less guarded, back on the desk, her fingers lingering on the frame for a second. A faint hum came from the air vent above, barely noticeable. But Cyrene's eyes flicked toward it for a split second. She'd noticed it weeks ago, a tiny camera hidden behind the slats, one of Caleb's many ways to keep tabs on her. She stepped closer to the desk, her movements casual, and slid a coaster under the photo, nudging it just enough to block the lens. Thorne's brow furrowed, but he didn't catch the move. "You're wasting your time here," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "This isn't a place for people who can't keep up." Cyrene's lips curved just a hint of a smile. She picked up a pen from the desk, twirling it between her fingers like it was nothing. "I keep up just fine," she said, her voice soft but steady, and dropped the pen back with a small clink. The sound seemed to echo, and Thorne's jaw tightened. Caleb didn't open his eyes. He just smirked, his voice low and sharp. "If she's playing me Thorne, I'll know by tonight. Nobody's that good." Cyrene's hand paused over her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. She typed something quick, her face calm, like she was checking a grocery list. But the screen wasn't showing emails or texts. It was a secure app, one she'd used back when she tracked money trails for a living. A string of numbers flashed, then vanished. She slipped the phone into her pocket and turned to leave her sneakers silent on the hardwood floor. Thorne's voice followed her. "You're out of your league, sweetheart. This isn't a game for girls who shop at thrift stores." She stopped just for a moment and looked back. "I'm not here to play," she said. Her voice was soft, steady, but it cut through the room like a knife. As she walked down the hall, the sound of her sneakers was drowned out by the distant clink of glasses from the party setup downstairs. A maid passed her carrying a tray of polished silverware and gave her a quick, pitying glance. Cyrene didn't react, but her fingers brushed against a small keychain in her pocket. A gift from her mother, a tiny metal star, scratched and worn from years of being carried. She squeezed it just once, then kept walking. The mansion was buzzing with staff, all preparing for the night's engagement party. But to them, Cyrene was invisible. A caterer bumped into her, not even apologizing, and muttered, "Watch where you're going." Cyrene stepped aside, her face blank. But her eyes caught the caterer's name tag, Lila. She filed it away like she did with every detail, every slight. In the kitchen, a group of servers huddled near a counter, their voices low but sharp. One of them, a wiry guy with a chipped tooth, glanced at Cyrene as she passed the doorway. "That's her, the fiancé." He snorted loud enough for her to hear. "Looks like she got here by mistake." The others laughed, their voices bouncing off the stainless steel. Cyrene paused, her hand resting on the doorframe, and turned her head just enough to meet his gaze. "Mistakes don't wear rings," she said, lifting her hand to show the simple band on her finger. The server's laugh died, his face reddening as he turned back to his tray. Cyrene kept walking, her steps even, but the air behind her felt heavier, like she'd left something unspoken in the room. The engagement party was that night in a seaside mansion that screamed wealth, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, waiters gliding through with champagne flutes. Cyrene walked in wearing a simple white dress, no frills, no brand names, her hair still in that same loose ponytail. The guests, all dripping in designer labels, turned to stare. Leora Valen, Calum's cousin, stood near the bar, her red lipstick sharp against her pale skin, her eyes scanning Cyrene like she was sizing up a knockoff purse. "Oh, honey," Leora said loud enough for the room to hear. "Did you borrow that dress from a waitress?" A few people laughed, their voices sharp and mean. Cyrene didn't answer. She just picked up a glass of water from a passing tray, her fingers steady, and took a sip. A woman in a glittering gold gown, her hair piled high, leaned toward Leora, her voice carrying. "I heard she used to be some kind of accountant or something. Can you imagine? From spreadsheets to this." She waved a manicured hand at the opulent room, as if Cyrene was a stain on the decor. The laughter spread low and cruel like a ripple across the crowd. Cyrene set her glass down, the clink against the table louder than it should have been. She turned to the woman, her eyes steady. "Spreadsheets tell stories," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "What's yours?" The woman blinked, her smile slipping, and the crowd around her shifted, uncomfortably unsure how to respond. A man in a navy suit, some hedge fund guy with a Rolex that screamed insecurity, leaned in toward his date. "That's the fiancée. What's she doing here applying for the cleaning crew?" His date, a woman with fake lashes and a fake smile, giggled. "Maybe she's here for the free food." The room felt colder, the air heavy with judgment. Cyrene stood by a window looking out at the ocean, her face unreadable. Another guest, a tech bro with slicked back hair and a smirk, called out, "Hey, Budget Barbie, you get lost on your way to the mall." More laughter. Cyrene turned, her eyes locking onto his. "Do you always talk this loud when you're scared?" she asked. The room went quiet. The tech bro's smirk faltered, and he looked away, muttering something into his drink. Before the tension could settle, a young reporter in a cheap blazer pushed through the crowd, his phone out recording. "Miss Halden, any comment on the rumors about Kylam's finances? People are saying there's trouble at Virel Enterprises." The room hushed, waiting for her to fumble. Cyrene tilted her head, her fingers brushing the edge of her glass. "Ask him," she said, nodding toward Calam across the room. "He loves questions." The reporter hesitated, then scurried off, and the crowd's whispers grew louder, sharper. Cyrene's eyes followed him for a moment, then flicked to a waiter who'd been watching her too closely, his earpiece barely hidden. She made a mental note, her face still calm, her hands steady. Kylam stood across the room watching it all. His face was calm, but his grip on his champagne glass was tight. He'd planned this night to test her, to see if she'd crack under the pressure of his world. Thorne sidled up to him, his voice low. "The system's been hit. Someone accessed our internal emails from an IP in Europe. It's her Calam. Has to be." Calam's jaw tightened, but he didn't look at Cyrene. Instead, he walked to the stage, pulling her along by the hand. The crowd parted, their whispers following like a wave. He leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. "I know what you're doing. Stop it now or you're done." Cyrene just smiled, small and sharp. "You're late to your own party, Calam." The stage lights were bright, the crowd watching every move. Kylam raised his glass, his voice smooth as he toasted their engagement. But his eyes never left Cyrene, searching for a tele-slip. She stood beside him, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, her face calm. Leora stepped forward, her heels clicking, her smile all teeth. "Cyrene, tell us, how does a nobody like you land a man like Calam? Did you just get lucky?" The crowd tittered, waiting for her to stumble. Cyrene tilted her head, her voice soft but clear. "Luck's for people who don't plan." The words hung in the air, and Leora's smile froze. A few guests exchanged glances, unsure what they'd just heard. A man in a corner, older with a gray beard and a suit that cost more than a car, coughed into his drink. He'd been quiet all night, but now he spoke, his voice gravelly. "I knew a girl like you once. Thought she could play in the big leagues. She didn't last." His tone was patronizing, like he was scolding a child. Cyrene turned to him, her eyes steady, and picked up a napkin from a nearby table, folding it slowly, precisely. "I'm not here to last," she said. "I'm here to finish." The man's face reddened, and he turned away, muttering to his companion. The crowd shifted, sensing something off, but no one could pin it down. Cyrene reached into her bag, pulling out a small envelope. She handed it to Calam, her movements slow, deliberate. "Your engagement gift," she said. The room watched as he opened it, his face unreadable. Inside was a letter, the seal of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, stamped in red. Calam's hand shook just for a second, before he stuffed the letter back into the envelope. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low dangerous. Cyrene's smile didn't waver. "Read it tomorrow, unless you want to step down tonight." The crowd murmured, confused, sensing something shifting, but not sure what. Thorne's face went pale, and he slipped toward the back of the room, his phone already in his hand. As Cyrene stepped off the stage, a woman in a velvet gown, her perfume sharp and overpowering, blocked her path. "You're embarrassing yourself," she hissed, her voice low but venomous. "This is Calem's night, not your stage for whatever stunt this is." Cyrene paused, her eyes scanning the woman's face, noting the slight tremble in her lips. She reached into her bag, pulled out a single business card, blank except for a small handwritten number, and slipped it into the woman's hand. "Call that if you need help," she said, her voice barely audible. The woman stared at the card confused, then stepped back, clutching it tightly as Cyrene moved past her. The big screen behind the stage flickered on. A video started playing, no music, no intro. Just Calem's voice, clear and cold, talking about offshore accounts, shell companies, numbers that didn't add up. The footage was grainy, reflected in a mirror, his laptop screen visible as he spoke to someone off camera. The room went silent. A woman in a sequin dress dropped her glass, the crash echoing. Calem turned, his face white, and looked at Cyrene. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, her hands still clasped. "You recorded me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "From your own laptop," she replied. The crowd gasped, some pulling out their phones, already recording, already posting. A woman near the stage, her diamond earrings catching the light, stepped forward, her voice shaking with indignation. "You're ruining this for everyone. This was supposed to be a celebration." She pointed at Cyrene, her nails painted a glossy red. "Who do you think you are coming in here like this?" Cyrene didn't answer right away. She bent down, picked up a fallen napkin from the floor, and handed it to a passing waiter with a small nod. Then she looked at the woman. "I am the one who knows the truth," she said, her voice so calm it sent a chill through the room. The woman stepped back, her hand flying to her necklace, clutching it like a lifeline. Thorne pushed through the crowd, his face red, his voice shaking. "You set him up. You've been living off his money, eating his food, sleeping in his house, and this is how you repay him." Cyrene didn't look at him. She just adjusted the strap of her bag, her movements slow, precise. Leora jumped in, her voice shrill. "She's a gold digger. She's been planning this from the start. Calem, I told you she was trash." The crowd buzzed, some nodding, others whispering. A man in a tux, some investor with a permanent scowl, called out, "If she's your fiancée, why's she acting like a fed?" Calem's face twisted, and he stepped closer to Cyrene, his voice loud now. "I've had women sharper than you, Cyrene. You're nothing special." The air crackled with tension, and a young woman in a floral dress, probably someone's assistant, spoke up, her voice trembling. "You're making a fool of him in front of everyone. Don't you have any shame?" The crowd nodded, their murmurs growing louder, feeding off each other's outrage. Cyrene's fingers tightened around her bag strap, just for a moment, then relaxed. She looked at the young woman, her eyes soft but piercing. "Shame's for people who hide," she said. The words landed like a stone in a still pond, ripples spreading through the crowd. The young woman's face flushed, and she stepped back, disappearing into the sea of guests. Cyrene didn't flinch. Her eyes met Calem's, steady, unyielding. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then she reached into her bag again, pulling out a single sheet of paper. She held it up, the red seal of the Department of Justice catching the light. "This is a federal search warrant," she said, her voice calm, but carrying to every corner of the room. "Calem Varel, you're under investigation for securities, fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice." The crowd parted as men in dark suits entered, their badges glinting. One of them nodded to Cyrene, a small gesture of respect. Calem's face went slack, his hands dropping to his sides. As the agents moved toward Calem, a man in a velvet jacket, some art dealer with a fake British accent, laughed nervously. "This is absurd. She's just a scorned woman making a scene." He turned to the crowd looking for support, but his laugh died when he saw their faces. Some shocked, others already distancing themselves. Cyrene folded the warrant carefully, tucking it back into her bag. "Scenes don't need warrants," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but it carried. The art dealer's face fell, and he busied himself with his phone, avoiding her gaze. The agents closed in their movements, precise, professional. Thorne bolted for the back door, his polished shoes slipping on the marble floor. He didn't make it far. 2 agents grabbed him in the parking lot, his protests muffled as they cuffed him. The crowd was chaos now, some guests slipping out, others live streaming in their phones held high. Kylam stood frozen on the stage, the banner behind him reading "Forever Together" in looping gold letters. An agent approached, cuffs in hand, and Kylam didn't resist. His eyes locked onto Cyrene one last time, searching for something, regret maybe, or fear. She gave him nothing. Just a small nod, like she was saying goodbye to a stranger. Outside, a woman in a catering uniform. Lila, the one who'd bumped into Cyrene earlier, stood frozen, her tray shaking in her hands. She'd overheard the agents talking, caught Cyrene's name in their hushed tones. "She's one of them," Lila whispered to another server, her voice trembling. Cyrene passed her on the way out, pausing just long enough to meet her eyes. "You dropped this," Cyrene said, handing her a single fork that had fallen from the tray. Lila took it, her hands unsteady, and watched as Cyrene walked toward the limousine, her plain dress glowing under the streetlights. Leora screamed, her voice cracking. "She's a liar. I told you, Kylam, she's a spy." Her hands shook as she pointed at Cyrene, her perfect makeup smudging as tears welled up. The crowd ignored her, their attention on the agents leading Kylam out. A reporter in the back, a young guy with a press badge, shouted, "Is it true? Did the fiancé set this up?" Cyrene didn't answer. She just walked toward the exit, her steps steady, her bag slung over her shoulder. The cameras followed their flashes, lighting up her plain white dress. She didn't look back. A man in the crowd, some tech executive with a nervous tick, grabbed Leora's arm, his voice low but panicked. "You knew, didn't you? You were in on his deals." Leora yanked her arm away, her face twisting. "Don't you dare. I'm a victim here." But her voice cracked and the crowd around her stepped back, their eyes narrowing. Cyrene, already at the door, paused for a split second, her hand on the handle. She didn't turn, but her shoulders squared like she could feel the shift in the room. The truth was starting to creep out, and she didn't need to say a word to make it happen. Outside, the night air was cool, the ocean waves crashing in the distance. A black limousine pulled up its door opening before it fully stopped. A man stepped out, middle-aged, gray suit, no tie, his face lined with years of hard decisions. He extended a hand to Cyrene. "Agent Halden," he said, his voice low but warm. 4 years undercover. You just took down one of the biggest frauds in a decade." The agents around them clapped, a quiet, steady rhythm that filled the night. Cyrene shook his hand, her face still calm, but her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. As the limousine door closed, a young agent barely older than Cyrene approached her with a tablet in hand. "Ma'am, we just intercepted a call from one of Varel's offshore partners. They're panicking, trying to shred documents." Cyrene glanced at the tablet, her eyes scanning the transcript. She handed it back with a small nod. "Let them try," she said, her voice steady. "They're too late." The agent grinned, a flicker of admiration in his eyes, and stepped back as the car pulled away. The crowd outside the mansion, now spilling onto the lawn, watched in silence, their phones, still recordings, capturing every second of her departure. The next morning, a blogger in the crowd, some influencer with 1 million followers, posted a blurry photo of Cyrene leaving the mansion. The caption read, "She played them all. Respect." It went viral in hours, shared by people who'd never met her, but felt her story in their bones. Leora's name trended alongside it, but for all the wrong reasons. Screenshots of her old texts boasting about fixing Kylam's problems surfaced on X. By lunchtime, her modeling agency had scrubbed her from their website. Cyrene didn't see the posts. She was already halfway across the country, her phone off, her focus elsewhere. The hedge fund guy, the one with the Rolex, sat in his office, his hands shaking as he read an email from his biggest client. They were pulling their funds, citing concerns after the Varel fallout. He'd been so loud at the party, so quick to mock Cyrene's dress, but now his own deals were unraveling, linked to Kylam's shell companies. He slammed his laptop shut, his face pale, and grabbed his phone, trying to call his lawyer. No one picked up. Cyrene's name wasn't mentioned in the email, but he knew she'd been the spark that lit the fire. Cyrene didn't see any of it. She was already on a plane, the ocean stretching out below her. In her bag was a small notebook filled with dates and codes, every move she'd made over the last 4 years. She flipped it open, her fingers tracing a single line, Lucent Project. It was the name of the fund she'd started quietly months ago, a non-profit to help victims of financial fraud. She'd named it after the light she'd seen in her father's eyes when he taught her to stand tall, no matter who tried to cut her down. Years ago, she'd sat across from Kylam at a diner, back when he was just a tech guy with big dreams and a crooked smile. She'd worn a cheap sweater, her hair in a messy bun, and he'd laughed, saying she looked like she didn't care what anyone thought. She'd loved him then, or at least the version of him he'd shown her. They'd stayed up all night talking about nothing and everything, his hand brushing hers over a plate of cold fries. She'd kept a photo from that night tucked in her wallet, his arm around her shoulders. She didn't look at it anymore. A flight attendant passed by, offering her a drink. Cyrene shook her head, her eyes fixed on the clouds outside. In her mind, she saw her mother's old sewing machine, the one she'd used to hem Cyrene's clothes when they couldn't afford new ones. "Never let them see you, Bender." Mother had set her hands steady as she stitched. Cyrene's fingers curled around the star keychain in her pocket, the metal warm from her touch. She'd carried it through every insult, every sneer, every moment she'd been underestimated. It was her anchor, her proof that she'd never been small. Now on the plane, she pulled out her phone. A text from an old colleague. "You did it. You okay?" She didn't reply. Instead, she opened a photo of her parents' old house, the one she'd grown up in with its creaky porch and chipped paint. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, sharp and clear. "Never let them make you small." Cyrene closed the phone and leaned back, the hum of the plane steady around her. She'd spent 4 years building this case, living in Caleb's shadow, letting him think he was in control. Every insult, every sneer, she'd carried them like weights, knowing they'd fuel her when the time came. In a small bar across town, the tech bro who'd called her budget, Barbie sat alone, his phone buzzing with notifications. His startup's funding round had collapsed overnight, investors spooked by the Varel scandal. He'd been so smug, so sure of his place in the room, but now his name was tied to Coilum's in a dozen articles. He scrolled through X, his hands shaking, and saw a clip of Cyrene's calm face as she handed Caleb the letter. He tossed his phone onto the table, muttering, "She played us all." At a press conference later that day, a journalist in a wrinkled suit held up a photo of Cyrene from the night before, her face calm under the camera flashes. "Who is she really?" He demanded, his voice loud over the crowd. The FBI director standing at the podium didn't hesitate. "Agent Cyrene Halden," he said, "the woman who dismantled a global fraud network from the inside." The room erupted, reporters shouting questions, but the director raised a hand, silencing them. "She's not here for your headlines. She's already working on the next case." The journalists scribbled furiously, but Cyrene was long gone, her name now a whisper of respect in rooms she'd never enter again. Caleb, meanwhile, sat on a helicopter, his hands cuffed, the city lights fading below. He turned to the agent next to him, his voice hoarse. "Did she ever care about me?" The agent didn't answer, just handed him a small envelope. Inside was a photo Cyrene and Caleb. Years ago, her hand on his, a ring glinting on her finger. A note slipped out, her handwriting neat and small. "I did once." "You broke it." Caleb stared at the words, his face crumpling. For the first time he saw it, the cost of his games, his tests, his need to control. Cyrene landed in a new city, her bag light her steps sure. She didn't need to look back at the headlines or the chaos she'd left behind. The truth had done its work. She walked into a small office, the sign on the door reading, "Lucent Project." A woman was waiting, her face tired but hopeful. A stack of papers in her hands, another victim, another story. Cyrene sat down, opened her notebook, and started listening. The world had judged her, mocked her, called her nothing. But she'd never been nothing. She'd been the one holding the strings, moving the pieces, waiting for the right moment. And when it came, she hadn't shouted or fought or begged for respect. She just stood there, let the truth speak, and walked away. You've been there, haven't you? Judged for how you look, how you talk, who you are. You've felt that sting, that weight of being dismissed. But you kept going. You held your ground. You're still here, and so is she. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.